playoffs championship round preview right here on DraftKings TV. I'm your host, Dan Stravern, in for David Kitchen this week. As always, we have Andrew Wiggins, Adam Levitan, and Jeff Ulrich with us to break down the conference championships. And we have New England at Denver, Arizona at Carolina, four teams that many expected to be here. And now we get to break down the contest and go into a two-game slate, gentlemen. But before we get into the games themselves, let's talk a little bit about injuries and how they'll play a part in this week's contest. Jeff, let's start with you.
Sure, yeah. So looking at the NFC first, Arizona, Carolina. These two teams are pretty healthy for the most part. There's a couple key injuries that you might just want to keep an eye on. The most important is probably Jonathan Stewart, who tweaked his ankle, I should say, a little bit at the end of last week's game. He missed practice on Wednesday, which probably isn't that surprising, especially since he's coming off foot issues. But he's someone to keep an eye on. I'd be pretty shocked if he didn't play, considering how important this game is. It's possible he's not at 100% though, so I'd like to see like a full practice maybe by the end of the week, just to be sure. A couple other injury notes, really, just guys on defense. Justin Bethel, cornerback for the Arizona Cardinals, is kind of banged up. If he doesn't play, that's kind of interesting because they already lost Tyrann Mathieu earlier this year, so that just weakens their secondary more. And then on the Carolina side, I should also say David Johnson was limited in practice too, but it really doesn't look serious with David Johnson, so I wouldn't worry too much about it, although, again, always check the reports on Friday, something can pop up. And then on the Carolina defensive side, looks like Jaron Allen isn't going to play this week. He's kind of already been ruled out. I'm not sure how big a factor that's going to be for Carolina. I think he's more of just like a pass rush specialist at this point. So those are really the main injuries from the NFC. Both teams are pretty healthy, which is great. You see both teams at full health. I just keep an eye on Stewart and probably keep an eye on David Johnson as well.
Adam, taking a look at the AFC, New England and Denver. Coming into last week, we had all the news about Edelman, about Gronkowski. Some people may have jumped the gun saying that Gronkowski was a little bit of a decoy with the back injury, with the knee injury, went out and had a big game. We saw what Edelman did. Where do injuries stand for this contest between the Patriots and the Broncos?
Yeah, before I get, I want to welcome Andrew Wiggins back from India. I'm curious where he had better internet in India or in Chicago.
Yeah, the internet was pretty good over there, so sad to say it might have been better than my internet at home.
Yeah, so I mean, I was one of the people that kind of got scared off Gronk a little bit last week. I did have him in a tournament lineup with Brady, which was great, but I didn't really have much exposure to Gronk at all, mostly because I thought he'd be limited, and Kansas had such a good tight end defense. Then Gronk goes out and plays 91% of the snaps. I would assume that he's going to take whatever same injections. People are insinuating that New England made this whole thing up. He didn't get an injection. His back wasn't bothering him. I don't really think that's true. I think it is bothering him, but obviously nobody is 100% this time of year. They get injections and they play, so I obviously wouldn't be concerned about Gronk at all. If you're going to beat the Broncos, I think it's through tight end more than through the wide receivers. So I think it's a pretty nice spot for Gronk. There's really only two options at tight end, and I think Gronk for me is a little bit ahead of Greg Olsen. And on the Edelman stuff, I expected him to be fully healthy. He hadn't played since week 10, but had been practicing for a month, so he was obviously himself. Got 16 targets, and I think he's in a good spot this week with Chris Harris banged up. And that brings me to the other side. Chris Harris was probably like the best, or at least top 3 corner in the NFL over the last 3 years, and he was just a shell of himself against Pittsburgh due to his shoulder injury. Only played 70% of the snaps, and really let Martavis Bryant do whatever he wanted, which was really surprising. This week, Chris Harris is practicing in full, which surprised me a little bit, but we take them at their word. It's a downgrade for Edelman, but on such a short slate, there's no way I'm moving off Edelman just because I think Chris Harris is healthy.
We can now get into breaking down these two games, and we will start with New England at Denver. Andrew, Adam already started down the road about Gronkowski, about Edelman, about their health. Where do you start in this contest? And maybe even let's take a step back. We'll focus on New England at Denver, but how do you construct the lineup on a two-game slate? Is this simply finding the best plays you can find and hoping for a little bit of variance in ownership?
I think it's a tough slate in the sense that there's not a lot of good value. And we've got the point in the season now where they've lowered the floor for the receivers. So you have two receivers, and Kotri and Brown, that I think are playable, that are under 3K. So you got to kind of consider them. And Adam said he's only considering 2 tight ends, but I throw Owen Daniels in the mix at 2.3K as well. You're not going to feel good about any one of those guys I just mentioned, but if you can get 4 catches for 50 yards at that price, I think that's going to be enough on a slate like this, and it allows you to pay up for some other people. So I'm going to try and fit in Gronkowski. I think he's a priority for me. I mean, we saw what he did last week. There aren't a lot of guys on the slate that have the upside that he has this week. And if he goes out and has a game like he did last week and you don't have him, you're pretty much toast. So I definitely prefer him over Olsen. He's only $500 more. I just think he's got a much higher ceiling, and you've got Bruce Arians coming out saying they're going to do everything they can to stop Greg Olsen. So I'm not totally focusing on the slate here, but just kind of hitting on that particular game. But hitting the tight end issue, Gronk is definitely a priority for me. Edelman as well, I think, is a priority. The targets are going to be there. He should be 100% now. It's a tough matchup, but with the short slate, you can't really be picking and choosing. And he's a guy that you can feel really comfortable about him. Probably approaching 7-8 catches and 100 yards, and that's a lot right here.
Now, Jeff, if we look at this contest, we see Denver with one of the, if not the top defense in the league all season long. But on the other side of the ball, we have Tom Brady, and we know what he does in the playoffs. We know what they do at full strength, as we saw last week, how Edelman makes this offense go. Can you take anything at all from Tom Brady's history playing in Denver? Is there anything to be drawn from his lack of success in Denver, in the playoffs, in the regular season, or is this a different beast because of Peyton Manning not having the arm strength and not having the ability to most likely put up big points?
Yeah, I know I've heard stories about how Tom Brady doesn't like to play in Denver as well and stuff like that. I'm not a huge believer in anything, especially just because every year is different in the NFL. So I'm not a big believer in, he didn't have success there like 3 years ago or something like that. That you shouldn't play him just based on that. I do think that the Denver defense right now is, I wouldn't say it's gettable, but it's more gettable than it was at the start of the year. We saw Pittsburgh get after them with some pretty big passing games the last 2 times they played them. And I think that the Patriots at full strength now in their passing offense can get after the Denver defense a bit. Denver hasn't scored double-digit fantasy points since like week 7 or 8 or something like that. So they're not this dominant fantasy force that some people may think they are right now. They're a very good defense with a lot of solid players, and they could still win this game. But I think that targeting the New England offense is for most purposes going to be a safe play. I think Tom Brady, for me, he's probably going to be the 3rd most owned quarterback on the slate if I had to guess right now. And I think that makes him a pretty good play. I think that you'll get a little bit lower ownership, but with a player who's definitely capable of throwing over 300 yards, a couple touchdowns. Brady's thrown for multiple touchdowns in, I think it was 9 of his last 13 playoff games. So I do like him from that perspective. The one thing I'd say about this game is that I think there's going to be a lot of popular plays in the NFC games. So especially a running back with Jonathan Stewart and David Johnson. I really like targeting maybe one of